We're down quite a lot in numbers, so I'm guessing everyone knows all about incident management and all the rest of it. It's a bit of a dry topic. I said to Raymond yesterday, this is probably the least thrilling of the 4 sessions. And there are some handouts there if you want to make any notes. I'll try and keep this one short because the document, the Connect Smart Guide, is actually quite good in terms of the detail around this kind of stuff. And I'm guessing from the fact that there's less people here, everybody already knows what an incident is. I think we've seen enough of it in the media in the last few weeks to have a fairly good idea. Okay, so the 4 workshops, those of you that weren't here earlier. Number 1, assess the cybersecurity. Number 2, develop a policy. Number 3, establish an incident management plan. So we're nearly there. Using the warrant of fitness model, which the Connect Smart Guide does. We've done the preparation, the planning at the start. This is the kind of handling of bad stuff as it occurs. Does everybody have one in their business already? Does anybody have an inordinately well-prepared plan should disaster strike? No. No one wants to say. I mean, to tell you the truth, a lot of this stuff is common sense. That's what I'm quite aware of. I think, you know, you think about the recent media coverage of a number of incidents, especially, you know, the Hollywood hack yesterday and the photos. Incident management can be anywhere from really technical to legal and privacy kind of issues. You know, I'm not going to mention whose photos ended up on a cloud server and being accessed by 4chan members, but I think it highlights to most people when you talk about stuff like that, that cybersecurity applies to your private photos as much as your business information. So, number 3, an incident management plan. Outlines the processes for your business to deal with a cybersecurity breach and who should be contacted if one occurs. It's fairly obvious stuff, really. Something bad happens, an incident being something outside of your security policy, a violation. Ideally, something picks it up. We're going to talk about that. And then somebody within the company has responsibility to deal with it and decide what to do and who to talk to and how to handle it and how to resolve it and all the rest of it. So it's fairly straightforward. The notes might be quite useful. There's a couple of links at the end as well which talk about some other places to go because there's quite a lot of this stuff online now as well. Why is it important to have an incident management plan? At the end of the day, it all comes down to speed. Speed of containing, resolving, and getting back to business. I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, we had a company on the North Shore rang me up, quite a large company, and said we've had a ransomware infection on one of our old computers. It was a Windows XP machine. They had a backup drive plugged in. They had 450 gigabytes of data encrypted. And then I think it kind of highlights the fact that where do you call? Who do you call next? They'd already spoken to their IT provider, which was good. It's a great first step. If you haven't got the knowledge internally, then ring your IT provider straight away and really make sure that you are doing things quickly to respond. Don't leave it for 3 days thinking, oh, I really don't know what that message means. You know, I should, you know, it's all about getting onto it, fixing it and making sure it doesn't spread throughout a network, if anything. Okay. So last week, everyone heard about the JP Chase hack. The 5 big US banks that are being targeted by the Russian cyber criminals, perhaps the Russian government. It's another one of those media stories that comes out and it gets people thinking. Clearly, none of us are operating large investment banks, which is great. But I pulled out this quote because I thought it was quite interesting. Being an organisation on the net is like having someone constantly banging on your door and rattling your windows. And I think that kind of pervades the sense of if anything's on the internet, connected to the internet, the potential for harm is ever present. I think for most of us, we know that security can never be 100% effective. But if you do the planning and the preparation, and you have the processes in place to handle things when bad stuff happens, that's the key. So that's the takeaway from this session, really. There's another quote from the JP Chase incident. Trickiest part of defending networks is determining the actual rather than the apparent source of an attack. Now, clearly, these guys have shed loads of money and all kinds of important information. It's a large American institution, so when people start saying it's the Russians because of the Ukraine situation, lots of people jumped on the bandwagon last week and say, yeah, it's the Russians, they're taking us down, it's Cyber War 3 and all the rest of it. And you think, wow, this is pretty impressive. I have to be honest and say, clearly I'm never going to know the real incident's cause, but so too will neither many of the actual people involved, because identifying what's actually happened is increasingly hard. We've had a lady last week with a router that was infected with a really nasty form of rootkit on the router itself, which is infecting all of her devices that were connecting onto it. And she'd had a couple of PC technicians in to look at it, and they'd kind of reset the Windows machines and all the rest of it. And within hours, the machines had been reinfected. And she rang us up, and we're on the phone. It's very hard to kind of get a picture of that. So actually getting to the root cause of something, until she threw the router away and bought a new one, it's quite hard to tell what really was the cause of the problem. It is, yeah, exactly, yeah. And increasingly those small and home office routers are being exposed to having firmware vulnerabilities in them, as there are exploits against the little box in your home which allows you to connect to all your other devices. So the router security is, network security is another part of your connection. And there's issues like that you need to consider as well. So finding the root cause of things can be quite difficult. Any questions so far? It's interesting, isn't it? I'd never come across it before, and I thought, wow, okay, fair enough. $150 and we're up and running again, but it was pretty nasty. So we're going to talk about the Target incident briefly from last year. Is everyone familiar with the Target breach? No. Okay. Has everyone heard of Target? It's not the furniture shop in New Zealand. I should make that clear for now. This is the American retailer, one of the largest retail companies in the United States. Okay. So what happened at the end of last year was a very complex and well-organised criminal attack against the company's systems, which resulted in the loss of 110 million customer records. And that includes credit card data and personal information and stuff like that. Now, the reason why we talk about this incident in particular, I am, not an expert, but I can read the information and pass the details on, is that the company missed opportunities during the attack. It was about 6 weeks that the whole process took place over to actually stop it. So having an incident management plan, taking note of bad stuff that happens, to put it bluntly, is increasingly important. So there's a document out there called a kill chain analysis of the breach. A kill chain, not that we were in a James Bond movie. This is a method or a methodology developed by Lockheed Martin, which is a big US government defense contractor. So it talks about the way that people breach systems, and these are the kind of stages of a kill chain intrusion. Now, I only put this up because it's kind of interesting the level of complexity that people think about this kind of stuff. Clearly, at a small business level, we're not going to use terms like this. We're not going to talk about weaponization, reconnaissance, exploitation, all the rest of it. But the reality is, of course, is that somebody comes into your systems more often than not by an email attachment these days, or going to an infected website that one of your staff members is visiting on an old computer. And all of a sudden, you've got some nasty piece of malware in your network, and your business systems are affected and your staff can't do work. That's to put it bluntly. In the case of Target, what happened was they had a whole range of experts on staff and a whole load of systems. They had intrusion detection systems, which are kind of flashing boxes that go, bad stuff's happening, do something. And what these guys have done when they've looked at the source of the incident and how data's been taken out of the company, there was all kinds of chances along this process to understand something bad's happening. If we go back to the beginning here, at the early stages, we talked last week about the need to secure not only your own systems, but talk to third parties about how they're securing theirs. One of the guys from the AV company was talking about an accountant who was on a Windows XP machine. You need to talk about your own systems, but also a third party. In this case, a heating and ventilation contractor who had access to an extranet facility to look at the plans of a store, ended up getting a virus on his computer, and it's believed that that was the source of the hack of the Target systems. Now, I won't go into the details, but basically, black boxes in the company were flashing for some time saying, somebody from Russia's knocking on the door and doing weird stuff, we think you should stop this. And they just went, false positive? I don't know, let's just ignore it. And the same way, when stuff was going out, They were sending data to a server in Russia. Another black box was saying, bad stuff, is this really supposed to be going to Russia? And then turns out that potentially staff members just went, nothing to worry about, ignore it, turn it off. And that was the kind of thing. So when we talk about incident management and planning, we need to be aware of stuff happening. Okay? Does that make sense? Right. Now, this is a great slide. I'm not going to read it through. Breaks down the process into 5 steps. So 5 easy steps to understand. Is everyone all right with that? Clearly the most important one we've already gone through, the most important 2 sessions. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. There's that old saying. Session 1, we talked about auditing our information in our systems, looking at what you've got and where the vulnerabilities are. Session 2, we talked about putting in place security controls and training staff. So that's a policy, and it's talking to people. It's pretty obvious, really. You know, talk to the people who open the emails and tell them, if you've got something suspicious, talk to John or something like that. It doesn't need to be overly complex. I read a story yesterday that said there's 326,000 New Zealand businesses have 1 member of staff, the owner. So clearly, when we talk about this stuff, she's not necessarily going to do all of this, but at least if you have some awareness of it, you can take steps. Okay. So when we're preparing, the obvious thing to do is to talk about who's going to do stuff if bad stuff happens. And coming up with a way, if you're in a larger organisation, that your staff can talk to those people. Simple. Who deals with bad stuff? How do I get hold of them? What's their mobile number? Right. On the monitoring and detect slide, I talk about the stuff that people call us with. Normally, in many of the cases that we deal with, customers end up telling businesses when bad stuff has happened. That's what we tend to increasingly find. Talking about the doctor's surgery in South Auckland, it was a patient that told them that their website had been hacked and replaced with a picture of an AK-47. They had no idea at all. They had no intrusion detection systems on a website because at the end of the day, it was just a brochure for a doctor's surgery. They didn't actually care. So increasingly, you need to make sure if you're getting calls from the bank, if you're getting emails or calls from customers or suppliers, make sure that you take them seriously. This is what we find is that in many cases, it's the customers that will get back in touch with you and say, you sent me this weird email, what's all this about? And you'll find that your email account has been hacked and a whole series of spam has been sent out. So monitoring and detecting incidents or breaches, you need to pay attention to every possible avenue that it could come from. So burglary, we talk about crime prevention. If someone breaks into the office and steals 3 laptops, hopefully you've got a plan in place to either track them down or wipe them remotely. You've already put in place hard disk encryption, so all of the data on those laptops is already protected. Surely you've prepared and planned. I mean, it's common sense stuff. I feel like I'm teaching people to suck eggs a bit in a way.
How many people do that? Yeah, good question. How many people sort of secure their hard disk on their laptops, or have ways to delete it? So with cell phones you can, but your laptops, I mean, it's not even buy for it.
No. And I think that's what this whole session's come down to, isn't it? Which is preparing. Be prepared. It's like I remember, after the Christchurch earthquakes, the sales of emergency kits just went through the roof because everybody was suddenly like, oh, this could actually happen to me. And clearly, people had died, so people took it more seriously. And I'm not suggesting that people need to die for everyone to take computer security seriously. But I think, the media coverage of incidents like the Jennifer Lawrence photos from yesterday, it actually gets people to talk about these things and think, well, I can understand how that could happen to me if I've got naked photos on my cell phone. Maybe I should go home and delete them tonight and take them off my iCloud. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. I can come out and talk about this till the cows come home, but there's always a catalyst normally. We dealt with 743 incidents in August at NetSafe. So I just did the numbers last night. We had $473,000 lost. That was what we were told about just at NetSafe last month. The numbers was down. August was relatively quiet. It didn't feel like that. But each time somebody comes to us at the bottom of the cliff when disaster has happened, they always say at the end, oh, it's been great talking to you. We're really going to take this stuff seriously next time. And I always think, I really hope they do. Yeah. So, yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we did it with the ransomware stuff. So we had about 1,000 cases of ransomware last year, and Decrypt CryptoLocker came out. So CryptoLocker was the nastiest form of the ransomware, which would encrypt all of your data using AES encryption. So it's military-grade encryption. And for the average person, you know, they're looking at a lock screen going, pay me $3,000. And I talked to one company in Remuera, and they just went, you know what, we're just going to chuck it out. Just going to chuck it out and carry on. We just won't worry about the last 4 years of company data. And I was like, bold move. Okay, we'll just carry on. You know, go and buy a whole new load of computers. And then we followed up. When the website came out, we actually sent emails out to everyone that reported it. And we said, you know, there's this website. Could you give it a try and let us know? And bear in mind, this is just me. So out of the 30 people that we spoke to, only 2 of them bothered to give it a try. Because most people had moved on. They'd just gone, oh, well, it's a bit like, you know, I'm moving house at the moment. You know, you go in the loft and you're like, what's all this stuff here for? You know, because it's been there. So and they were the same way. It was possessions and data that they just figured, oh, well.
What's the website you asked them to go to?
Decryptcryptolocker.com. So this was, the CryptoLocker gang got taken down at the start of June. And one of the security companies actually found that they'd stored a whole range of decryption keys on their cloud server. So the people that the hosting company had gone, hold on a minute, this looks helpful. So they gave it to a security company and went, here's a load of unlock codes. So these guys have built an unlock site for people that have been affected. So, but we followed up with 30 different people and only 2 of them gave it a try. So, you know, wait and see. Okay. Bad stuff's happened. You've listened to the customers. You've got your flashing black boxes that are telling you bad stuff's happening. What do you do next? You triage the incident. Determine the scope, impact, and what's affected. At the end of the day, how bad is it? What's happened? Has the website been hacked and defaced? Have we lost all the customer accounting data? Are all our credit card accounts all over the internet? How do we respond? Okay, so categorization. You don't need to have a spreadsheet with, you know, high, medium, low. You don't need to do traffic light protocols and all the rest of it. But most of us will understand, you know, what's important to our business to carry on. Do we need to talk to an expert? Do we need to talk to John in IT? Can we just handle it ourselves? Who's responsible? How long is it going to take to fix it? These are all fairly obvious questions. I think most of us, when we get into something like this, we've got a rough idea how bad something is and how do we fix it. So, it's common sense stuff, really. But having that plan in place means that you can proceed a bit quicker. Responding. So, something bad's happened. You know who to tell. You've got an idea of how long it's going to take. What do we do now to fix it? So there's this document, the Connect Smart document, talks about 3 groups of people who would respond. Clearly, if there's only one of you in the business, you wear all the hats. In a technical sense, you need to analyze what's happened, talk to people, try and work out how you can repair or recover the systems affected. And then at the end, you're the one who's going to write something that says, the bad stuff happened like this is what we should do next time. That's the technical hat. So if you've got enough people to wear all these hats, that's great. If you haven't, it's all up to you. From a management perspective, we talked about this the last session. Cybersecurity in a business needs to be driven from management. So somebody high up needs to understand that this stuff's important. And equally, if bad stuff happens, somebody high up should be taking responsibility for it, especially for the last one, communicating with customers affected by any breach. Okay. If you've had customer data stolen, if you've had staff data stolen, you need to make sure you understand what you're going to do about it, not just sweeping it under the carpet. We talked about the Privacy Commission at the moment. There's talk about mandatory breach reporting going through. There's new legislation coming up later this year, maybe into next year, where if something happens along these lines, you will now have to tell the Privacy Commissioner what's happened. Currently, you don't. you don't even have to tell your customers. Ideally, you would. Especially if credit cards are involved, ideally you would work with a bank and your merchant provider and say, you know, can we get these cancelled and some sort of program in place? But yeah, this is all subject to change. And lastly, the legal stuff. You know, if you're in a health industry, for example, or if you're in a finance industry kind of sector, there's probably a whole range of legal stuff around compliance. You know, there might be auditing teams working with you around what happens with the data and who gets to own the data, see the data and all the rest of it. So you need to think carefully about what legislation you're working under and who you need to tell. When we talk to doctor surgeries, and we increasingly do, you know, they're having computers hacked. Well, I always say to them, you know, you need to talk to the Ministry of Health now, because if the PC in the reception area has got one of those logons to a health kind of system, there's the potential for that your patient data could have been compromised as well. So thinking through the wider stuff as well. And clearly, you might want to actually report it. You might want to tell the police. I'll tell you now that in reality, for a lot of the low-level stuff, the police will not be interested. And that's not a reflection on the police's lack of interest, that's a reflection on lack of resources. We know that there's a team in Wellington and there are teams in electronic crime labs around the country dealing with computer hardware and mobile devices and all the rest of it. But what we're increasingly seeing is that they just do not have the resources to deal with the volume of stuff that happens. You know, when we talk about 743 incidents at NetSafe in August, around a quarter to a third of those will have been hacking. Now, if your Facebook account's been hacked, the police are not going to be interested. If your email account's been hacked, the police are probably not going to be interested. Unless you've lost a significant amount of data or a significant amount of money, unfortunately, the reality is that the police probably won't have the resources to investigate.
So what sort of businesses have been reporting it? Yes, a lot of people got the idea that they're only worth being hacked if they're a big business. Because of a small business, they won't worry that much.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it happens to everyone. I talked to a guy at one of the big accountancy firms last night about this, and he was saying, because they do a lot of fraud work for larger businesses in New Zealand, and he was saying it really does happen to anybody and everybody. And you know, you talk about the JP Morgan hack, and you talk about, you know, the Hollywood hack and all the rest of it. People are just out for data, out for financial information all the time. You know, we talk about the rattling on the doors and windows. It really does appear to me, and not wanting to put the fear of God into people, it just seems to be epidemic proportions now. I think any company that has internet-connected systems or data of significance to the business really does need to take this stuff seriously. We've talked to people, talked to a building surveyor last week who was in an interesting position where some information had been leaked and it was impacting on a sale of a property. So there was going to be some sort of talk between the real estate agent and the two people involved in trying to buy the house and stuff like that. And that was a new one to me, you know, that the fact that the building surveyor might get hacked and somebody might want to get data around the sale or purchase of a building. And I thought, well, that, I guess it's valuable, you know, to a commercial property agent, maybe it is valuable to know who's going to put what offer in on what property before an auction. So there's all kinds of angles that this stuff happens, really. I think that's interesting. And hopefully, you can always talk to us. You can always talk to NetSafe, and if it is serious, we can talk to the right guys in police and get you sort of hooked up.
So more and more people encrypting emails, or is that something that should be done, or is it?
Yeah.
What's the state of play there with the email encryption?
I get asked that question probably once a day at the moment. So we had a lady ring up yesterday. She was in her 70s, and she wanted to know how to use PGP encryption on her email. And I just thought, wow. Because people read this stuff in the paper and they go, okay, so I should be encrypting all of my data. I should be encrypting my emails. And then they ring us up and they go, so how do we encrypt our emails? And I'm like,
So how did you answer that?
I mean, I can provide information. There's plenty of websites online. PGP encryption is relatively hard to set up for your average kind of PC user. But yeah, I mean, there's an array of services coming online. So there's more and more companies looking in post-Snowden hack. You know, now that we know that the governments of the world look at everything that we do. A bold statement. Maybe they might not be interested in it. You know, lots of people, I think, increasingly are aware that it's my stuff, I should keep it private. So
what sort of email encryption is easiest?
I mean, there are a couple of companies out there that provide sort of systems that you can just log in, like a Gmail account you can register for. I think one's called Hushmail, I think. I can't remember now. They tend to pop up and then go quite quickly because they get kind of approached by various agencies that say, hey, we need a backdoor into your encryption. I think Mega is a provider in New Zealand at the moment of encryption services, isn't it? They put themselves up as being very much big in this space. There's lots of providers. I guess a Google would work. I don't know. I'm quite sensitive about who I trust.
Yeah.
We talked about the Gmail incident a couple of weeks ago. So Google acknowledged the fact that it was now giving access to email accounts so that people could read stored data to look for images of child exploitation material. So your Gmail account, if you think that is private, clearly it's not. In the sense of if there's data there, then the company can run anonymous systems on it looking for kind of information that you might have in it. They caught a child sex offender that way, going through email accounts. Everyone good? Nearly done. Resolve and review. Probably the most important part of this process. Bad stuff happened, you fixed it, everyone's happy. How do we understand what happened in reality, and how do we make sure it never happens again? The old prevention first kind of stuff. We've put our policies in place, we've got our systems in place. If bad stuff's happened, how do we go back and then patch all of those and fix things up and all the rest of it so that we minimise future risk? And ideally, you talk to the people in your team that handled the bad stuff and see if they've got any suggestions about how to make that process better next time. It's all fairly obvious. There is, in your handouts at the back, this slide as part of the Connect Smart Guide, the Emergency Incident Checklist. It's not the most enormous document. I've put a couple of links at the end as well. But it should give you some ideas about where to start in terms of building something like this, if it's a team of people or if it's just you. Give you some kind of questions to think over, ways to be prepared should an incident occur. And lastly, this particular document, the Data Safety Toolkit from the Privacy Commission, is really, really good. It's online, it's free. It gives you kind of simple information around how to respond to a data breach. There's kind of processes in there that the Privacy Commission has worked through with businesses and with individuals to address some of those really obvious questions that you might have. I would really recommend reading that. It's actually quite a good piece of work, and it really ties into the stuff around responding and prevention as well. If you've got some time on your hands and you like technology, the National CyberSecurity Centre, so this is currently New Zealand's version of a CERT, or a Computer Emergency Response Team. The National CyberSecurity Centre, which operates out of GCSB down in Wellington, has this guide, the Incident Management Guide, with lots of big flowcharts. If you like flowcharts, it's 86 pages long. I had a quick flick through it yesterday. It's very, very detailed. These guys are responsible for protecting critical infrastructure in New Zealand, so power companies, water companies, the banks and all the rest of it. They do produce an annual report about the stuff that they see. It's quite low level and kind of cleaned up, but it's quite interesting to read what those kind of guys are dealing with at a much higher level. So there's a couple of thoughts. But apart from that, it's pretty much me done for this morning.